In 1706, the public women of Madrid played a key role in causing the Allied troops to withdraw from the Spanish capital. This retreat marked the start of the demoralization of the pro-Habsburg forces. So one could say the actions of the Prostitutes of Madrid were decisive in making Philip V of the French House of Bourbon the King of Spain. But what exactly did they do? I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in this episode I will discuss how the Bourbon cause gained the loyalty of many in the Crown of Castile, what prostitution was like in early modern Spain, and the first Allied occupation of Madrid, before revealing the details of the Prostitutes conspiracy. First, a bit of context for those unfamiliar with the War of the Spanish Succession. King Charles II is famous for having been born with all kinds of physical and intellectual disabilities as a result of the Habsburgs' inbreeding. This condition also made him unable to produce an heir, which led to a succession crisis that foreign countries exploited. In his last will, the dying king named Philip, Duke of Anjou, a grandson of the King of France, as his heir. Some believe that only the powerful King of France could maintain the territorial integrity of the Hispanic monarchy. Philip was initially recognized by all territories of the Spanish crown, and by powers such as Portugal, England, or the Netherlands. However, tensions rose due to the actions and schemes of the Holy Roman Empire, ruled by the Habsburgs, the same dynasty to which Charles II belonged. Fearing a personal union or at least political alliance between the French and Spanish crowns, which would disrupt the balance of power in Europe, and due to a mix of dynastic, territorial, and commercial interests, an alliance was formed against the Bourbon candidate. Thus, foreign powers instigated a great war, which in Spain, one of the main theaters of the war, had elements of a civil war. But why would the prostitutes from Madrid care who the King of Spain was? Well, this had much to do with the propaganda by those loyal to Philip V. The propaganda often went beyond purely political and legal arguments and reached religious and identity dimensions, which helped achieve a great social mobilization for the war in Spain. Bourbon propaganda praised King Philip as the most Christian king, generous to the people, contrasting with the infidels who supported Archduke Charles, who had the support of Protestant troops from England, the Netherlands, and Germany. Thus, the Bourbon cause was identified with the Catholic religion and presented as a crusade against the heresies of Charles's allies and their sacrilegious looting on Catholic Spanish soil. Loyalty was sacralized, so political loyalty to Philip V was tied to unshakable faith and moral integrity. It was easy to present the war as a defense of the country against invaders, since most Allied soldiers were foreigners, while in the Bourbon side, half or more were from the Crown of Castile, and the rest were mostly French. Furthermore, the pro-Habsburg soldiers committed looting, which only generated hostility among the common people. There was also a component of territorial rivalry. While discussing the landing of Archduke Charles in Barcelona, the Admiral of Castile, who supported Charles, warned his allies that Castile will never obey a king who entered through the Crown of Aragon, since Castile was the head of the monarchy. So, we now know what messages mobilized people, but how was the propaganda spread to even get prostitutes involved in a dynastic war? The celebrated loyalty of the Castilians was achieved through the pressure exerted on the population by soldiers, officials, and the nobility and clergy, who were mostly loyal to Philip of Anjou, and by pamphlets, newspapers, sermons, festivities, plays, or songs dedicated to the Bourbon cause. In Baroque Spain, kings developed strong emotional bonds with their subjects through all kinds of rituals and symbols. Portraits and banners of the king, commemorations of military victories, processions, and other mass civic and religious events served to form these bonds between the populations across the empire and the king, in an era without photography, radio, television, or the internet. In a predominantly rural, illiterate, and deeply Catholic society like Baroque Spain, friars and parish priests were key agents of propaganda capable of shaping public opinion. The word of the parish priests was essential for recruiting, supplying, and housing troops, and equating the military demands of the Bourbon side to a religious duty. And what practical results did this propaganda achieve? This way, society was militarized, and many contributed in one way or another to the war effort, such as the prostitutes I will discuss later. Philip V was able to mobilize thousands of militias that operated beyond their original local scope and handled defensive tasks, which allowed professional soldiers to take on more important duties. In this case, loyalty was not free, as the local elites, who usually led the militias, expected favors from the court, such as public positions or noble titles. Let's now move on to the first Allied occupation of Madrid. But first, a reminder: if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and support me on Patreon or with donations. Thank you. After the Bourbon siege to retake Barcelona failed, the pretender to the Spanish throne, who styled himself as Charles III, declared in late May 1706 that taking Madrid was the top priority. He believed that capturing Madrid would make the nobles and towns in Castile recognize him as king and end this war. Allied troops stationed in Catalonia conquered Aragon, while an army of about 20,000 men, mostly Portuguese with some English and Dutch soldiers, advanced from Portugal. This army, led by the Portuguese Marquis of Minas and his deputy, the British Earl of Galway, moved towards Madrid. Aware of what was coming, Philip V and his court abandoned the capital in June 21. Within a week, the allied army of Minas and Galway entered Madrid without encountering resistance. In their euphoria, they proclaimed Charles III king on July 2nd and threw gold and silver coins to the crowd of Madrid to win their favor. By mid-1706, the situation looked very bad for the Bourbon side. Austria had gained positions in Italy and the Netherlands. Savoy had advanced in northern Italy. The English had captured Gibraltar, and Louis XIV of France was ready to make peace and accept that his grandson, Philip of Anjou, would not be King of Spain. The war could have ended then, but the Allied diplomats failed to negotiate smartly and went too far with their demands, so they lost their chance to end the conflict on the best possible terms for them. The Allied generals had strategic differences and a lack of coordination, which reflected the Allies' different and even contradictory goals. Moreover, it soon became clear that Archduke Charles did not inspire much enthusiasm in Castile. Only 27 prominent figures, 15 of them from the clergy, came forward to swear allegiance to him. As chronicler and Marquis of San Felipe, Vicente Bacallar, noted, this had more to do with political calculations and survival than unconditional loyalty to King Philip V. Many nobles retreated to the rural estates to see how events would unfold without committing themselves, while others only secretly communicated their support for the Habsburg candidate to avoid possible reprisals later. Very smart. While Allied troops weren't moving from Madrid, the Bourbon armies cut off the Allies' communications between Aragon and Castile, and the city of Salamanca, key to bringing supplies from Portugal, returned to the Bourbon side. This is what the Portuguese had feared from the start, believing it would have been better to take Badajoz and then coastal cities in Andalusia in southern Spain, rather than march into the interior of Spain at the risk of ending up isolated. Capturing Madrid proved useless because it did not create the expected impact to make the nobles and cities of Castile declare their loyalty to Charles. Without controlling the countryside to secure supplies, it was unfeasible to maintain the occupation for long. From mid-July, the indifference of Madrilenians and Castilians turned into hostility, encouraged by some successes of the Bourbon armies. For example, 300 Portuguese cavalrymen stationed in the mountains of Sierra de Guadarrama decided to return to Portugal due to the attacks they were suffering, and on their way back, they faced several ambushes. The Castilian people were widely mobilized with hostile and subversive actions against the occupying army. It's within this political and social climate that we need to contextualize the conspiracy of the Madrid prostitutes. Meanwhile, the Allied soldiers, mainly Portuguese, were idling away, thinking the war would soon be over because they had conquered the capital of the Hispanic monarchy, a monarchy they had been vassals to a few decades earlier and viewed as tyrannical. They did nothing but get drunk, eat, and fornicate, which allowed some locals to kill a few soldiers at night. The Marquis of San Felipe mentions this, and other sources confirm it. Chronicler Luis Bartolomé de Salazar y Castro criticized the Portuguese for wasting time on comedies, music, and prostitutes. Domingos da Conceição, chaplain of the troops under the Marquis of Minas, wrote, quote, "Lust reigns in this court more than in any other in Europe. The mundane women are countless, and I believe very few have not practiced Cupid's school." End quote. Essentially, he was calling all the women of Madrid whores. But this fondness for prostitutes by the Allied soldiers was a significant weakness that the Madrilenians knew how to exploit in favor of Philip V. Regarding prostitution in the early modern period, it should be noted that since the 17th century, the social acceptance of prostitution declined. It went from being considered a necessary evil, even a public service, to a sin that needed to be prosecuted by civil and ecclesiastical authorities. In 1623, Philip IV ordered the closure of legal brothels, and many correctional houses were founded, which were basically prisons for marginalized women, often prostitutes. As expected, prostitution continued with less public and health control, and only the most scandalous prostitutes or those denounced by private individuals, often competitors in the sex trade, were persecuted. Clandestine prostitution was practiced in the streets, taverns, inns, private houses, or illegal brothels. And for reference, by the mid-18th century, there were more than 100 illegal brothels in Madrid. Poverty and the lack of family support drove many women to prostitution. The usual profiles of prostitutes were orphans, widows, abandoned wives, abused women, women who couldn't marry because they couldn't afford a dowry, maids from the countryside without family ties in a city, rape victims, or those who had consensual sex outside of marriage. There were also salaried women who engaged in prostitution on the side to make ends meet. In Baroque Spain, the best way to discredit a woman and attack her honor was by calling her a whore, as they were considered the scum of society, along with older women with disabilities. Still in 1704, Philip V issued a decree in the Council of Castile ordering mayors to imprison hookers in women's jails. Who would have thought that these very prostitutes, the scum of society, would help him retake Madrid and win the war? Okay, but enough teasing. What exactly was the conspiracy of the Madrid prostitutes? To explain it, I will first quote the chronicler Vicente Bacallar. Quote, "The public women took it upon themselves to entertain and finish off, if they could, this army. Thus, they went in groups at night to the army tents and introduced a disorder that brought infinite danger, as there were more than 6,000 sick in the hospitals, most of whom died. This iniquitous and horrible ploy used the loyalty and love for the king even among public harlots, and the sickest adorned themselves with scents and makeup to contaminate those they hated, dressing hatred in the guise of love. Such impious loyalty has not been read in any story." End quote. In other words, the prostitutes from Madrid organized themselves to coordinate their actions and took advantage of the fact that they were frequently visited by the pro-Habsburg soldiers to wage a biological war using the prostitutes who carried sexually transmitted diseases. In early modern Christian Europe, women were blamed for spreading diseases and breaking sexual morality, accused of contaminating the bodies and souls of the always innocent men. But this time it was okay because they were not dealing with innocent men. The prostitutes likely infected the soldiers with syphilis, an epidemic disease most likely brought from the Americas that affected everyone from nobility to the poorest until penicillin was introduced in 1943. Syphilis in its advanced stages is very visible, which is why the Marquis of San Felipe mentioned they had to use makeup, perfume, and seductive clothing to hide their disease and infect the enemy with this STD that could be a lifelong and deadly illness. We cannot verify if they caused 6,000 casualties this way, but it's a plausible number considering how often the Portuguese soldiers visited prostitutes in Madrid. As one of King Louis XIV's emissaries wrote in 1707, women were much worse and more dangerous than their husbands. In this case, he was referring mainly to noble women, who also played a key role in the war by mobilizing people, forming alliances, and passing on information. Due to diseases, deaths, and desertions, the Allied occupation army of Minas and Galway was reduced to about 12,000 troops. Without provisions, with their supply lines cut by the Bourbon armies, venereal diseases, and the hostility of the Castilians, the Allies decided to retreat to a friendly territory like the Kingdom of Valencia. Thus ended the first Allied occupation of Madrid after 40 days, and on August 3rd, Bourbon troops re-entered Madrid supported by armed guild troops. On August 7th, they burned the portrait and banner of Charles III in Madrid's Plaza Mayor, and the repression of those who supported the Habsburg pretender began. With this whole story of the prostitutes, one should not assume the Madrilenians had an admirable moral. The people's misery led many to behave like scoundrels, making false accusations against personal enemies or wealthy individuals, falsely labeling them as austracistas, meaning supporters of the Habsburgs. The common folk incited soldiers to enter houses, and the common people, more than the soldiers, did most of the looting after the city returned to Bourbon hands. In any case, the Allied retreat from Madrid in 1706 marked the beginning of the Allies' loss of initiative and the demoralization of their army, which ultimately led to their defeat. When Madrid was occupied for the second time in 1710, the rejection by the Madrilenians was even greater, and Archduke Charles found the streets deserted, the shops closed, and the balconies empty, with no one cheering his entry. For better or worse, it was the actions of the prostitutes from Madrid and a large part of the Castilian population that allowed the Bourbon to become King of Spain. If you like this episode and are on YouTube, please smash the like button and leave a comment if you were surprised by this story, and subscribe to New History of Spain for more content. You can support my work at patreon.com/newhistoryspain and get exclusive benefits such as early access or make a one-time donation with one of the methods you will find in the description. Thank you for listening and see you next time!